So welcome back to the Resources Conservation and Recycling webinar program. My name is Mitchell Jones. I am the Outreach Editor at Resources Conservation and Recycling. It's a pleasure to have everybody with us today. So before we kick things off, just a few brief notes about the webinar program itself. So this is the English language version of the Resources Conservation and Recycling webinar program. We normally run this program every second Thursday at 10 o'clock a.m. Pacific time. This is a rare exception where Nicola has very kindly agreed to shift this to the Monday, but normally it's on a Thursday. So this is the English language version. We also have a Chinese language version. So if you have Chinese language skills and you're interested in the RCR webinars in Mandarin, you are very welcome to check those out. So the scope of this particular webinar program essentially matches that of the journal. We cover all scope elements from resources conservation and recycling within our program, so you can expect to see a wide range of different topics, and we try to run a very balanced program, so we try to equally weight the different scope elements in our program. The one point that we do make is we want the program to be as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. We want people who are working in adjacent areas to perhaps be able to attend and see research areas that they might want to transition into or collaborate with or learn something about. And because of that, we ask that authors or our presenters provide some audience accessibility essentials in terms of minimizing jargon and field-specific terminology in their presentation and providing some brief introductory content that explains the context and background, the fundamentals of their research area before they delve into the actual study itself, just to make it that little bit more accessible. Registration is necessary for the Zoom environment where we find ourselves now. So if you're interested in joining us in the Zoom environment for the program, you need to register. You can find those registration emails, the links, in the Resources Conservation and Recycling newsletter, which is circulated at the end of each month. You can also find them posted on social media. So you can find them LinkedIn, X, and Facebook, or you can also find them on the Resources Conservation and Recycling Journal homepage. So if you go to the journal homepage, the Elsevier page for Resources Conservation and Recycling, and you go to the About tab, you will find there the webinar calendar. We have all of our previous webinars archived there, so you can find all of your previous speakers there available to you, and also the links to register for the upcoming events. Now, all of our programs are actually archived to YouTube. So if you would prefer to watch the live stream on YouTube, you can, in fact, watch the live stream on YouTube without registering in the Zoom environment. Or you can also find, obviously, all of the previous speakers' webinars on YouTube, youtube.com/@RCR journal. The final point is that we do very much want to, or endeavor to, modify our program to suit your preferences. We really run this program to be something that our research community can benefit from and take something away from. We are very open to comments, criticism, feedback of any kind that you may have, wishes or preferences or suggestions for the program. At the end of today, you will have the opportunity to leave any feedback in a survey. The survey will open when you close the webinar today. Okay, so I'm going to bring up the program for today right here. So, so we can start a little more formally. So we've had our welcome address. I'm going to now very briefly introduce the journal before introducing our speaker for today, Nicola. We're very lucky to have Nicola with us today. Then we're going to have a few notes on housekeeping, essentially how the program operates today, followed by an approximately 20-minute presentation. We're very relaxed on the time, but an approximately 20-minute presentation followed by some questions, and then some information about the next event and the closing remarks. So hopefully everybody here knows the journal Resources Conservation and Recycling, or maybe if you don't, that could also be a good thing. It means that you are learning about the journal for the first time. We are a journal that I think has fairly clear research interests. The clue is in the name. Resources, conservation, and recycling are our interests. Specifically, systems-wide strategies, technological, economic, institutional, and policy focus, resource management practices, conservation, recycling, and resource substitution, resource productivity improvement, restructuring of production and consumption profiles, and transformation of industry. A few brief housekeeping notes before we kick things off. If all communication could please be in English. We have people from a very, very broad range of countries. We're very lucky to have such diversity in our program, but we obviously need a language that we can use to bridge our communication gaps. And in this case, that's going to be English today. We also have closed captions available for anyone who might be interested. Those are running in Zoom and also on YouTube. So if English is perhaps not your first language and you might benefit from some captions, or if you prefer to watch your videos with text because you're on the train or whatever, you have that available to you. Feel very free to avail yourself of those closed captions. Over the course of the webinar, please also feel free to post any questions that you might have in the Q&A. We're really very lucky to have our presenters, Nicola today, here live and able to answer your questions. So be sure to use the Q&A if you have any questions. We're also more than happy to facilitate you asking your question in person, so to speak. But if you would like to verbally ask your question using your microphone or camera rather than via text, or have a bit more of an extended discussion with the speaker, we'll be very happy to accommodate that. All you need to do is indicate your interest in doing so using the raised hand reaction in your toolbar. So our speaker for today, we're very fortunate to have Nicola SACCANI with us from the University of Brescia in Italy, where I'm sure it's very, very nice. I'm a big fan of Italy. He's going to be speaking to us today on the topic of aligning product service systems with environmental sustainability, the role of revenue models. Nicola SACCANI is Associate Professor at the University of Brescia and part of the RISE laboratory at the Department of Mechanical and Industrial Engineering. He is a member of the steering committee of the ASAP Inter-University Research Center on Services in Industrial Enterprises, a community that involves academics and managers to develop culture and excellence in service engineering and management. For years, he has been working on circular and sustainable supply chains and the role of digital servitization in creating business and environmental value, combining qualitative and quantitative research methods. He has authored numerous scientific publications in high-level journals. He also operated in funded research projects and transfer projects on these topics. Thank you so much for being with us today, Nicola. I'm very excited for your presentation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so that you are able to share yours.
Thanks a lot, Mitchell, for this nice and kind introduction. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today and the opportunity to speak at this resource conservation and recycling webinar series. So thanks again to all the team and also the audience that is attending the webinar. This is the title and especially the paper that I will talk about in my speech. The paper is Aligning Product Service System with Environmental Sustainability, investigating the key role of revenue and pricing mechanisms. It has been published on RCR a few months ago in 2024, and is written together with my colleagues Federico Drodegari and Laura Scalvini, also from the University of Brescia. So let's start with some motivation for our research. For those who don't know what product service systems or PSS are, we can use this definition taken from the literature. They are a system of products, services, and supporting network and infrastructure that is designed to be competitive, satisfy customer needs, and have a lower environmental impact than traditional business models. So for instance, a car sharing system is an example of PSS, product service system, or the world famous Rolls-Royce powered by the hour model, where they sell the usage of the engines for the airplanes instead of the engines themselves, is another, let me say, well known and much used example of PSS. From this very early definition of PSS that you see on the screen, you see that one of the aim or the expectation about product service system is to reach a lower environmental impact than traditional business model where we simply sell a product. But the literature has already suggested to us that this is not achieved, that potential has not been achieved or at least fully achieved, because we see that PSS do not automatically lead to a reduction in resource use, and instead they may lead to unintended negative outcomes, just for instance, due to burden shifting of life cycle impact through the life cycle phases, or rebound effects that are entailed by slack resources, for instance, obtained through PSS. I'm not going into these topics in my discussion. Also, it has been found that the effects on sustainability is not one size fits all, I would say, but it depends on the very characteristics of the specific type of PSS offered, and business objective may conflict with profit objectives. Let me say that more specifically in the literature, we found that the potential environmental sustainability of PSS has been addressed in quite generic terms. We'll see something more in a moment. Instead, that on specific detail configuration of PSS. And even more important, it has been addressed in terms of potential achievable benefits using often only single case or even only anecdotal empirical evidence about that potential achievement, instead than thoroughly analyzing the actual achievement with a more systematic empirical approach or analytical approach. Of course, there are exceptions to this, but until now, despite more than 20 years ago, this element of environmental sustainability has been pointed out as one of the main reasons for PSS. Research has mostly focused on the business rationale of PSS and a little less on the environmental aspects and how they are matching the economic aspects. Specifically, coming to this paper, we have found that the role of revenue models and pricing mechanisms in contributing to the sustainable outcomes of PSS has been rather overlooked today. Sorry. Also in business practice, we have a very similar findings. Usual PSS offerings are driven by business logic, so stabilizing revenues, making more profit, developing closer customer relationship, sustainable competitive advantage, and so on and so forth. And the environmental impact of PSS is a kind of a nice to have, an additional element that can be, of course, useful for marketing or greenwashing in a bad sense, or improving customer relationships. So it's a sales argument, but it's not a fundamental reason of their offering. And this has been confirmed by some research that we have carried out within our ASAP Research Center that you mentioned when introducing myself, with the community of companies that take part to the community. We found a very limited, despite growing attention to the development of and promotion of PSS for environmental purposes. So, given this context, our study aims to explore the linkages among PSS types, their environmental drivers, the revenue models and pricing mechanisms, and want to propose an actionable morphological metrics to link these dimensions, the 4 dimensions above, and also assess their alignment in practice. And maybe more original, the study explores and proposes a new form of PSS revenue model that we call pay-per-emission, and a related pricing mechanism that we call emission-based. as a way to build a formal and explicit linkage between the PSS value capture dimension and the environmental dimension of product service systems. So, given the exploratory nature of the study, we decided to adopt an integrative review approach. So we do an integrative literature review in order to amalgamate insights of three diverse domains that are the PSS archetypes or PSS literature, the environmental value drivers of a servitized or PSS business model, and the revenue and pricing mechanism that are adopted. This is conceptualized and translated into a morphological box. I will go more into, let's say, practical findings in a moment. Concerning the first area, the PSS type, we decided to use the very famous taxonomy by Zucker that identifies three main archetypes of product service systems that are called the product-oriented PSS, the user-oriented, and the result-oriented. In the product-oriented, we have a more traditional way of selling a product with a transactional perspective. So the ownership is shift to the customer, and a set of services are sold together or after the sale of the product. Given this similarity with the traditional business model, we expect only incremental, so small incremental environmental gains compared to a traditional business model, due, for instance, to the sales of maintenance services that extend the life cycle of the product, or consultancy or energy efficiency services that increase the resource efficiencies. Then we have the user-oriented PSS, where the ownership is retained by the provider and the customer pays in reason of the access to the product, like a rental model, or the intensity of usage of the product. In this case, the provider is more incentivized to offer services that decrease life cycle cost and increase the sustainability at the same time. And in result-oriented PSS, where what is sold is the outcome based on the usage of the product or the asset, for instance, the number of pages that are printed by printing machines, or the availability level or performance level of a machinery, we find the most incentive to coupling economic and sustainability impacts, so to achieve a greater sustainability impact. Okay, so we use this as, let me say, a reference framework for our analysis. But as I mentioned, let me go a little aside the paper. We will come back to these findings in the end. Our underlying question is whether the revenue and prices mechanism of PSS are really aligned with the environmental objective. So let's make a couple of conceptual examples to understand this. A typical case is a product-oriented PSS, for instance, a piece of machinery that we sold to a customer, and aside we offer services in the different life cycle phases, which aim to optimize customer processes, so to provide some benefits to the process. We have a traditional revenue model based on a one-off transaction and the service fee. The way in which we sell the services can influence the sustainability outcomes of this PSS. For instance, a repair service has some sustainability potential because it can extend the life cycle of the product, or, for instance, optimize its performances. But if we sell it with a traditional cost plus approach, so man-hour plus spare parts plus a markup, as a provider, we can be incentivized of selling more parts to make more profit, or performing more repair to make more profit at, let me say, at the discharge of the environmental benefit, while the customer may be incentivized to postpone the repair to save money until it's too late and he has to replace the product. If we use a different approach, for instance, a value-based approach, we can align the incentive. If we sell, for instance, an energy optimization service, which is priced based on the amount of energy cost, so energy consumption that is saved, with a sharing perspective among the provider and the customer, we find a win-win, let me say, situation. As well, for a maintenance contract, instead of a reactive repair service, that is priced based on the value that is achieved, for instance, measuring the statistical expectation of a lifetime extension of the product. In this case, we can couple the business objectives with the environmental benefits. Let's take another example of a user-oriented PSS, a car sharing, for instance, but also a digital printing machine sold where you pay the pages that are printed. Typically, we have a pay-per period, so a fixed fee, like a rental fixed fee revenue model, or a pay-per-use, where you pay in reason of the amount of kilometers that you drive, for instance. An all-inclusive fixed fee per period is not so good for an environmental point of view, because it can entail an opportunistic behavior by the customer that will use in a careless way the asset, or can entail an unnecessary usage of the asset. You drive more because you don't need to pay for driving, for instance. On the other hand, a pay-per-use can incentivize the user to avoid any unnecessary usage, because you pay exactly in reason of what you use, of how much you use the car, for instance. And on the other hand, the more the car is efficient, the more the provider can make profit. So it's also incentivized in that direction. You can even fine-tune this, refine this by adjusting the tariff based on the driving behavior. So to price driving behavior that consume less, avoid damages, and so on. So to better align with environmental incentives. You can do even more. You can even transform this revenue model into something that is more explicitly aligned with the sustainability objectives. For instance, you can transform the pay-per-use in a sort of pay-per-emission, where the customer will pay in reason of the emissions that are directly or indirectly entailed by the use of the car. The distance is, in a way, a direct measure of the indirect measure of the emissions, but also of the amount of energy or fuel that is consumed, the level of maintenance, and so on. And so the pricing mechanism, for instance, can become an hybrid mechanism with an emission-based approach, where different models of cars are priced, have a different base tariff in reason of their LCA, so the expected life cycle environmental impact, as a base tariff euro per kilometers, and it is adjusted, as I said before, based on the driving behavior. So this is a conceptual but practical example to what we mean in terms of aligning the revenue and pricing mechanism to the characteristics of the PSS offerings. And basically what we wanted to show or to explore with the paper is, in a way, exemplified by these a couple of examples. In order to do so, we need to introduce the environmental value drivers. So based on the type of PSS and its characteristics, we can identify these value drivers, so factors that contribute to reducing the environmental impact connected with the PSS. We call them drivers because they are the reason of the sustainability outcomes, so the emissions or the abiotic depletion, anything else that we want to measure. But as I mentioned, the sustainability outcomes also are influenced by the revenue and pricing mechanism that we adopt in order to sell this PSS. And the two, environmental value drivers and revenue and pricing mechanism, can conflict. So based on the literature, we have identified 7 categories of environmental value drivers: resource efficiency, lifetime extension, intensified product usage, increased or improved recycling and reuse of the asset at the end of the usage cycle, the product system substitution that is often entailed by PSS, the dematerialization and transparency, often related to the use of digital technologies in PSS offering, and the reduction of hazardous and toxic or even critical materials and the pollution entailed. The third area of our literature review was the identification of typical revenue models and pricing mechanisms adopted for PSS. Here there is really nothing new for who knows this domain. So we have traditional revenue model, pay-per period, as I mentioned, or fixed fee, pay-per-use, pay-per-performance, or pay-per-outcome, and any kind of combination of the above ones, and cost-plus, market-based, or value-based pricing mechanism. Then in the paper, you can find a review of studies that have tried to analytically assess the impact of revenue models on sustainability outcomes of PSS. For instance, Roshi and Rashid analyzed a user-oriented PSS applied to a washing machine and compared a pay-per-use revenue model with a fixed fee and the combination of the two without specifying the pricing mechanism, and found that pay-per-use outperforms pay-per-period in terms of environmental impact or emission. In general, we can say that there are few studies that they almost all focus on use-oriented PSS, comparing pay-per-use with fixed fee or pay-per-period. Many of them are curiously applied to washing machine or other durable goods. Pricing mechanisms are completely overlooked, and they mostly converge in saying that pay-per-use is superior to pay-per-period in terms of achieving better sustainability outcomes. So putting everything together, we have developed these morphological metrics that, as I mentioned, consider the 4 dimensions studied: the PSS archetypes, the revenue model, the pricing mechanism, and the environmental value driver. For each of these dimensions, we point out in this table the options that have been found in the literature. So the 3 main PSS archetypes, the typical revenue models, the pricing mechanism, and the 7 environmental value driver categories. Before focusing on the green cells, let me go to the next slide for a moment to show that these metrics, that is very simple, it's based on a literature review, can be used in our view as a tool, a simple tool, also by practitioners to understand and assess the characteristics of PSS, their characteristics in terms of revenue and pricing methods, and the environmental value driver that are triggered by the PSS, and how these 3 dimensions, three aspects are actually aligned. If they're not aligned, so the revenue and pricing mechanism entail bad, let me say, behaviors for the environment, they can be adjusted. And this also can be applied also when designing new PSS offerings. So what we did here is also outlining 2 new options. At the revenue model level, we propose a pay-per-emission option, which can be modeled, for instance, as a particular case of pay-per-performance, where I set targets, for instance, for the environmental impact that should be met, and the revenue I achieve are based on achieving or not achieving the target, or are decreased or penalized by the amount of which we don't achieve the target. At the pricing level, we can develop emission-based pricing, where the price is at least partially, so for instance, with an hybrid combination of different mechanisms, calculate based on the environmental impact component. For instance, simply, let me say like this, through a carbon pricing logic, where I charge a part of the tariff based on the emission, or on a cap and trade like scheme, where again there is a pricing premium or penalty based on the overreaching of a given threshold, for instance, or of value of emissions. Of course, I'm just outlining these two new revenue and pricing mechanisms. So to conclude, the contribution of this study is through the investigation of this triple linkage among the revenue models, the pricing mechanism, and the environmental value drivers of PSS. Then we have this adoption with this proposal of new revenue and pricing mechanisms that are meant to explicitly and directly align the environmental impact generated by PSS with the business and revenue and profit objective through this emission-based pricing and pay-per-emission revenue model. And finally, there is the morphological matrix as a practical tool to assess the alignment of current or new offerings. What can we do in the future? We need a thoroughly and more in-depth analysis and conceptualization of this pay-per-emission and emission-based concept that have been just sketched, I would say, in the paper, and also how they relate to the environmental value drivers that have been outlined in the paper. Within our ASAP Research Center, we are working on this through a community research that is involving the companies to actually investigate in their own offerings how this concept can be embedded. And we will have also a webinar very soon in which we'll deal with this and also feature the case history by ABB and Link & Co. So thanks a lot for your attention to my presentation, and I'm here for any question, doubt.
Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation, Nicola. So I'll just give you a moment maybe to, so that webinar was April the 15th, I believe.
Yes.
Is that? Yes. So for anyone in the audience who might be interested in hearing more about this, you have this webinar April 15th that you might be interested in attending. I think there was that QR code. I'm sure you can email Nicola if you need the QR code or the link or anything.
Can show it for a moment more.
Yes.
Maybe
so let's hold that for a couple of seconds. Anyone who's interested in the QR code, they can feel very free to use that now. Okay, so we'll head to the question time then. So I see that we already have a couple of questions, but I have some questions too. So I'm going to start things off and then we will switch to the Q&A in just a moment. So Nicola, you have to forgive me. I'm not really coming from the same research area as you, but I sort of wondered, you were talking about these traditional business models. Are these, so is this really, is this a range of different models, or is this a single model that you're describing that simply you buy something, the traditional product, you buy it? Or when you say traditional business models, is there a range of models, or is this just one thing that you're referring to?
Let me say, the traditional is just you buy the product and the provider of the product doesn't care anymore.
Okay.
Let me say, in the more traditional, we say that services are seen as a necessary evil. So you don't provide any service, or if you do, it's because you're obliged by law, or you find some small opportunities to squeeze the customer because they're obliged to come back, for instance, for spare parts. Then there is the product-oriented PSS that is actually what I spoke about before. It's actually very similar, but here the provider sees services as an important driver of revenue, profit, customer satisfaction and retention and so on. So here you can build a whole story of services around the product.
It seems to me, Nicola, perhaps it's just that I'm not working in the field, but it seems to me that a lot of companies are actually heading towards service models where they were previously a product. I know, for example, you might have noticed with software over the years, Microsoft Word, Adobe Reader, EndNote, or maybe not EndNote, but a lot of these companies, they are now going to Adobe Photoshop and things like that too, to month subscription models rather than selling products. I sort of wondered, maybe this is a little bit off the track, but is this typically more profitable? And what's the typical pricing differences between the product model and a service model?
So I would say maybe one of the main reason, or even the main reason why companies move to this business model is to enlarge the customer base. Why? Because you cancel the upfront cost you have in buying a product, especially for CapEx, highly intensive CapEx asset like, and more, let me say, in the manufacturing and production side. So you don't spend millions of dollars for buying a product, but just pay it little by little in some rates or some installments, and that's the main reason. Of course, they found this. You can transform it into also a way to minimizing residuals usage by the provider, and so to gain more profit. For the software, it's easy to say because you don't have additional cost in selling a new unit. So this business model work perfectly. For manufactured products, it's not as simple as this, but the idea is similar. Let me see.
It's very interesting to see this, how this is working from an environmental perspective. I hadn't actually really considered that myself, actually. I sort of wondered, you were talking a little bit about that the product, the service, and the result. Was that, no, what was the middle one? The middle one was.
User-oriented use and result.
Yes. And you said that the results had the best environmental impact improvements. I was just wondering, I didn't fully understand why that was the case.
Because there is the highest incentive to make one unit of product last longer, because the more it lasts, the more both, let's say, the customer and especially the provider can take advantage of the usage from one single unit without producing a new one. And second aspect is the resource efficiency. So if part or all the cost of running a product is taken by the provider, it has the maximum incentive to make it cost less and so on. So reduce energy consumption. So that's in part common to the user-oriented, but you have even more incentive to have this behavior, let me say.
I see. That's very interesting. I also wanted, so these studies you showed quite a range of these studies from the literature, and I saw this assessment grid that you showed. But I was wondering if you'd like to elaborate a little bit more about how these studies are actually done and how empirically driven they are. Are there actually empirical? How do the people perform empirical studies in this area, and are they common?
Uh, I also, with some colleagues, made one recently. So usually there is a lot of problems, I would say, in carrying out an empirical study because of the many variables. So you can imagine there are in the model, the PSS model, the usage model, and also measuring the environmental impact. So most of these paper develop analytical or simulation models with some equations or relationship that are, of course, based on real cases or estimates of the parameters like the energy consumption of. We've done this for washing machines, for instance. So you model the product is a bill of materials, the amount of materials that are within a product, the types of material and the energy consumption. But of course, you approximate this. And then there are the usage habits of the customers that can vary a lot and that can influence a lot the sustainability outcome you achieve. So there is a balance between, let me say, empirically derived parameters and simulation. Sometimes they are very conceptual. So the analytical equations about, I don't know, utility for the customers are maybe very sound theoretically and very interesting, but a bit far from the practice, let me say. So that's what we found, at least in the literature.
And how interested are companies in collaborating in this kind of research? Do you have, in your experience working within this research field, is it easy or possible to work with companies to sort of do these sorts of empirical studies or get better information?
So two answers. They're currently not much thinking about that, but they're starting. So in our ASAP Research Center, we have this community of companies at Manager where we have many interaction with. And we found them very interested in carrying out this project that has just started about trying to assess their, let me say, alignment and trying to see if there is some space for nudging, let me say, the offering towards better sustainability outcomes. We envisage a lot of problem too, because once it goes against profit, you need to rethink the whole the whole strategy to make it really effective. And so but it's very, very fascinating, I would say.
Do you maybe also have some insights? So when we're talking about profit and the environment, at least sometimes it comes down to legislation in terms of governments making. I mean, realistically, it's very rarely cheaper and more profitable to do things in an environmentally friendly way unless the governments are introducing taxes and incentives for things that are green and things like that. Do you maybe have some insights on the current state of the legislation and where the legislation should move to encourage that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think that could be a very important trigger for this model. As carbon taxes are going a bit in that directions, but there are other norms, at least in Europe, that little by little will push in this direction. For instance, the extended producer responsibility that oblige producer to take care of, or at least monitor the end of life of the product so that they are correctly collected at the end of life and recycled. But even more, for instance, staying on the household appliances, some countries, such as France, oblige to have a small share of washing machines that are remanufactured on the market. So these oblige, that is, for a little share to develop servitize or PSS business model where at the end of life maybe you don't sell the washing machine, but you rent it or sell it in pay-per-use, and at the end of the contract you put it again on the market after it is refurbished. And so having this kind of obligation and provide fiscal incentives to, for instance, refurbishing, solving the many problems about secondary raw materials that exist at the moment for treating it not as waste, but as raw materials, the taxes and so on are needed, because sometimes there are obstacles that don't even not incentives, they are obstacles to these business models currently.
And in terms of perhaps what you've experienced in your literature studies or from your own experiences, do you have any information about consumer or societal reception or sentiment on the different models? So, for example, you spoke about the use model, the results-based model, the traditional model, product model. So in terms of consumer acceptance of these models, how do consumers see these different models? Do they like them? Do they dislike them? Do they have preferences for the different models?
Very nice question. It would take probably a lot of time to answer and also a lot of knowledge because there is not just one answer. What I can say is that in terms of private end users, there is probably a gap, a contrast. Most of the end user would say we love more sustainable products. Many of them are not willing to pay more for sustainable products, so there is an issue about willingness to pay. And there are other obstacles, for instance, the attachment to products. So there are some products like clothes, for instance, you prefer to own, especially if they are luxury clothes or something you like a lot. For some other products, maybe you're less interested, or for instance, the cars, we are seeing a shift in consumer behaviors from wanting to own the car to not caring so much. In industrial settings, so B2B is a bit different. I would say, for instance, if we take industrial machinery, it's difficult to sell product as a services, but it's more mainly due to the complexities of these offerings. So we see it in some areas. For instance, if you have to manage a warehouse, maybe the forklift truck, you can buy them as a service, or the air compressed or the air conditioning of a factory, maybe not the core machine. On the other hand, until very little time ago, the sustainability dimension of this offering weren't considered much in industrial settings. And now we are seeing that is ramping up from very low, but quite fastly because of, scope 3 emissions and regulation and sustainability reporting. So I think it will grow quite fast.
Hey, very, very nice,
But
very interesting.
of course, it's a very, simplified picture of what I'm providing. I have to say, very simplified.
But that's still great. Sometimes it's not possible to really provide a fully comprehensive answer, but this is great. Okay, so we have a couple of questions from the audience, so I'll just switch to those. So the first comment first. Thanks for a nice presentation. I wonder, how can pay-per-use of a car sharing minimize careless behavior? That was the first question from the audience.
Okay, so if we put it, thank you for the question, first of all. Also, the literature tells us that when we move from a traditional model to a user-oriented, for instance, when you shift the ownership, there is this problem. So the customer does no more own the product, so it can have a careless behavior. That's true. So I would say our aim as a provider of a car sharing would be to reduce this risk, so to minimize careless behavior, not to completely avoid. There are some ways. For instance, one way is the fact that the car sharing is monitored. So there is some kind of contract. You know who is driving the car, and usually there are penalties that are included in the contract. The same as in car rental. If it happened to me to have a little problem with a car that was rented, and I paid, so I don't like to have a careless behavior, and that's it. So you have digital technologies that allow monitoring. You have contracts, and that's the way you reduce this risk, basically. You can provide incentive, as I mentioned, with an emission-based pricing. So if having a careless behavior provide more risk to failures, damage to the car, or simply worse resource efficiency, you can penalize or price this behavior in terms of unit price per kilometer. That would be a good way for using the pricing mechanism to align these incentives.
Very nice. And we have another question here. I like the idea of pay per emission to moderate consumption by users, but wouldn't it provide incentive for companies to have more carbon intensive products out there?
Okay, thank you also for this question that is very focused, very centered on a problem, and I think I don't have an answer because, of course, if you want uh, to gain more money, you will need the customer to use the product in a way that provides you more money. That's the same reason why you try to sell more spare parts today, even if they're not needed. So we need to have some, there are two ways. One way is to find a way to invert this relationship. So the more the product is carbon intensive, the less the provider is gaining profit because, for instance, of public intervention. So carbon taxes on the carbon intensity of these products. So you gain more money, but you give that to the government because you're not working good for the environment. The other is, again, to align this carbon intensity with the benefit of the company. So the company need to rethink its strategy so to have more units of less carbon intensive products in the market. So to increase profit on a life cycle basis and not on a year-to-year basis based on the sales of the product. But we need really to work on this idea quite a lot.
Very nice. Well, what an interesting. I do really like these particular topics that delve into more economic and societal factors because they are quite some way from my own research area, but so interesting. Yes. So thank you so much, Nicola, for your wonderful presentation, and thank you also to the audience for their questions that helped us to flesh out the discussion a little bit more there into some other interesting facets of the dialogue, the scientific dialogue there in this area.
Thanks a lot.
Yes. So
Thank you.
yes, thank you, Nicola. So that essentially does bring us to the closing remarks for today. So I will just bring up my screen again. So again, thank you so much, Nicola, for being with us. It was really wonderful to have you on the program and certainly a very interesting presentation that I think people really enjoyed. The next presentation, which will be in 2 weeks' time, or about. Sorry, where this presentation is a little early. This has moved a little bit forward, so it's actually closer to 3 weeks' time. So the next presentation will be from Lydia Balz, who's joining us from the University of Applied Sciences in Mainz, Germany. She's going to be speaking with us on the topic of the enabling role of support flows in circular supply chain designs. So another interesting topic that's a little bit off my area also, and perhaps closer to Nicola's topic. So that's going to be Thursday, 8th of May, 2025 at 10 o'clock a.m. Pacific time. I will just say as a final reminder, be sure to catch Nicola's webinar on April 15th if you're interested in that topic. I'm sure he has a lot of interesting content there. If you probably already have the QR code, but I'm sure that if you have interest in that, you're also able to contact Nicola about that. So
thanks a lot.
Thank you so much to everybody. Thank you, Nicola. And until next time, I'll say goodbye to you all.